Hello, everyone, and thank you for joining today's NKBA KBIS design webinar, Physiology of Lighting. As we continue our theme of lighting and design for the month of May, I'd like to say thank you to Hardware Resources for generously sponsoring this month's design and business webinar series. Now, please join me in welcoming today's speaker, LaDonna Erickson, founding partner of Construction Education Consortium. LaDonna, please take it away.
Good morning, everyone. I really hope that all of you are healthy and well, since this is our part of the wellness that we look at all the time when we are dealing with making sure that our lives are well. And unfortunately, many times our lives are not because of the environment that we live in today. So we're going to start talking about the physiological effects of artificial light on humans. And this goes back to my roots, actually. I taught anatomy, physiology, and biology for over 40 years of my life, and I've been teaching for over 50, and I've been in design and construction for over 40. So yeah, I'm not quite that old, but we do have a lot of things that we can take a look at and really see some major differences. What we're going to talk about today is that 24-hour circadian cycle that we hear about all the time when we're talking about human-centric lighting. And we're going to look at it in a different way because we're going to look at the evolutionary scale of that. We're also going to look at the human physiology due to the presence of artificial light and the changes that occur, and why artificial light is actually so bad for our bodies. And we're going to distinguish between the difference between psychological advantage of human-centric lighting versus the negative physiological effects on from human-centric lighting. You know, we had the hominids are over 20 million years ago that our ancestors roamed the earth. Our sun is over 4.5 billion years old, but modern man today is only about 200,000 years old. We're very young in comparison to our hominid ancestors. And then we look at artificial light, and artificial light has only been around for about 145 years. So our bodies have not been able to adjust to that. If we look at light and human evolution, our solar day is a very predictable 24 hours. And it's that period of light and dark, depending on the time of year, how many hours of light we have and how many hours of darkness that we survive in. That gives us our sleep-wake cycles. And we are creatures of the light. For 66 million years of evolutionary history, our ancestors and our humans today have lived on that 24-hour clock. And it's very difficult to change that 66 million years of evolutionary history. If we look at the adaptations that we've gone through for that sunlight variation, humans started walking upright, probably about under 200,000 years ago. And they started walking upright because it was easier for them to carry things around because they could utilize their forelegs, and they became our arms and hands. And it also helped them to stay out of that harsh sunlight that they lived in along the equatorial area of Africa. Because when they stood up, their whole body wasn't subjected to the sun. It was just basically the upper portions of their body. And so giving that less sunlight on their bodies, their fur could decrease, or their hair could decrease to cope with the heat because it wasn't shining directly on their body. But the problem was their skin had to cope with that same UV light, that same sunlight. And so their skin adjusted produce cells that would produce melanin, which is that substance that's produced when you get a suntan, or if you have darker skin, you have more melanin in your skin. And so they were able to produce that melanin, and their skin darkened over time. Now, that took about 40,000 years for that to occur, but they were able to do so because of these little melanocytes. And I show you this, some of you I'm sure have seen this when you were taking biology years ago. This is a cross section of the skin, and it shows those melanocytes, which are the cells that are at the bottom of the epidermis, actually, and they produce that substance called melanin. Now, melanin is kind of gobbled up by cells in our epidermis, and those cells that do that are actually called keratinocytes. But they take that melanin in and it sits over the top of the nucleus, and it helps to protect the nucleus from any harmful rays that may be coming from the sun, so we don't see a lot of genetic defects if we have that melanin in our skin. Now, of course, that makes our skin color darker. And in the African continent, where our ancestors basically came from, they had higher amounts of melanin, and it protected their skin cells from that UVB light, and it protected the folate vitamin, which is vitamin B9. And that vitamin is very necessary for fetal development, and it's necessary for fitness to reproduce. And of course, it plays a role in DNA activities. But the problem was, if you have more melanin, you also protect that cell from its production of the precursor of vitamin D3. So those ancestors ate a lot of organ meats, they ate a lot of eggs, and they ate a lot of products that had a lot of vitamin D in it. So their diet took over and helped them to produce that vitamin D that they needed. Now, as our ancestors started to move out of Africa, remember, they were nomads, they were hunter gatherers. And so they followed the herds, they followed wherever they could get food. And because of the northern portion of Africa was in a desert and a very arid region, they were moving away from that region and started moving northward. They were moving farther away from the equator, and they got into more temperate zones, into higher latitudes. And the ozone layer, we assume, was actually thicker at that point in time. However, the sun's rays were coming through that ozone layer at a more of an angle than straight in like it does at the equator. And so as it was going through that angle, through that ozone layer, you get less UVB light, which is 290 to about 320 nanometers. Now, what that means is they were not getting very much UVB light. They were decreasing the amount of melanin in their skin over the years, and they started getting lighter colored skin because they were farther away from the equator. And during the winter months, they hardly got any UVB light at all. Now, what that does, yes, it reduced their skin color. Their skin color became lighter. That took about 40,000 years. But it also reduced the amount of vitamin D that they were producing. And vitamin D is necessary for immunity. It's necessary for the absorption of calcium. It's necessary for a lot of different things that we'll be talking about. But because they were moving to these northern climates, they were reducing the amount of vitamin D that they were producing. And we still see this today. We still see the fact that the farther northern latitudes receive less sunlight, they receive less UVB rays, and therefore you produce less vitamin D. So it becomes an issue. It becomes a problem for those of us who live in those northern latitudes. So as we look at this, the other thing that we saw was a change in our eyes. People who live in those equatorial regions and more southern latitudes have an extra fold in their eyelid, and they also have darker pigmented irises. This helps to protect their eyes more from those UVB rays. It helps to protect their eye from the brilliant sunlight because their eyes are smaller. However, once you get into those northern latitudes, then the eye becomes more round and you start seeing lighter colored iris, which is, of course, the blues, the greens, and the hazels, because that allows more light into the eye and you can see better. So it depends on where you live. Very often, what is happening to our bodies? Now, we're going to skip ahead thousands and thousands of years to 1880. And Thomas Edison, many people call him the father of the light bulb. He wasn't. He actually stole it. There were people long before him who created light bulbs. They just hadn't created a light bulb that was practical because their light bulb would only last 2 or 3 minutes. Thomas Edison found a filament that would last a lot longer, and therefore he had the light bulb that actually worked well. So we've only had about 145 years of artificial light. Now, problem being, when we look at this 145 years of artificial light, remember, we've been talking about 40,000 years of evolution, 200,000 years, to 20 million years. 145 years, our bodies have not become accustomed to the artificial light that we live in today. Yes, the improvement in lighting technology did a lot for us. It liberated us from dependence on daylight. We're not dependent on that 24-hour cycle anymore. We can work, we can play at any point in time. We have third shift. We can work nights. We can work daytime. We can play at night. It doesn't make any difference. We have been liberated from that 24-hour cycle that our ancestors lived in. However, what that did, that caused an intrinsic daily cycle disturbance. Our cognitive performance has actually deteriorated. Our physical performance has definitely deteriorated. And physiological disruption of our bodies is off of the charts. In 1948, the World Health Organization was actually established because we saw that there was a lot of growing health challenges in our world. That wasn't that long after that 1880 production of a light bulb. In the 1980s onward, there was definitely a noticeable rise in the number of health issues that are reported worldwide. If you think about it, people, we see the number of cancers being increased. We see the amount of autistic syndrome or autistic behaviors increasing. We see multiple sclerosis, diabetes, all of these different problems in our world today, and they keep increasing. Now, a lot of people like to actually blame it on chemical food preservation in the 20th century. Yes, that caused problems. More pesticides, more herbicides, all of those have been causing problems throughout our lives. However, the big problem is lack of natural sunlight. We're spending too much time indoors because it disrupts our circadian rhythms, it disrupts our sleep patterns, and it disrupts our metabolic cycles. I want to take a little bit of a look at the eye. Now, in 1816, Arthur Jacob, who was an Irish ophthalmologist actually, he found a structure in our eye that was called Jacob's membrane for many, many years. Later, they changed the name of that to the retina. And the retina is what holds the rods and cones. Remember, the rods and cones are what allow us to see images. He only found the rods and cones. The rods, of course, see black and white, the cones see color. It wasn't until 2005 that David Barrison found another structure on the retina. And that structure on our retina is called the intrinsically photosensitive retinal ganglion cell, IPRGCs for short. Jacob's membrane was much easier. It was a much simpler time. Now we call them by these wonderful long names. So, what does this intrinsically photosensitive retinal ganglion cell do? Well, it takes in light and only light. We're not able to see any images because of it. All it sees is light. Interestingly enough, it can actually be stimulated in people who are blind. They don't really see light, but it affects their bodies because it receives that light image. Sometimes that doesn't happen, and they can go into what's called non 24, which we talk about in a different program that we produce. But anyway, that's neither here nor there. These IPRGCs bring in light and it stimulates that IPRGC to produce a substance called melanopsin. Now, melanopsin will travel along like a nerve fiber to an area of our brain called the hypothalamus. And that's where this SCN, this other cell inside of our hypothalamus called the suprachiasmatic nucleus. And the suprachiasmatic nucleus is what we could call our internal clock. It is what actually receives all the information and keeps track of everything in our body, actually keeps that clock working. Now, yes, it sends information to the pineal gland, and that pineal gland is what produces melatonin. And melatonin is what keeps our sleep wake cycles going correctly. And that's the one that we hear about all the time. That's the circadian rhythm that everyone talks about when they talk about human centric lighting and circadian lighting, is keeping that wake sleep cycle alive. Because when melatonin is produced, you go to sleep. When that suprachiasmatic nucleus receives light signals, it sends information to the pineal gland to stop producing melatonin and you stay awake. Now, it's not just the pineal gland that suprachiasmatic nucleus affects. It's also the rest of what that hypothalamus actually deals with. So, our sleep wake cycles are affected by 480 nanometer light. Now, when we talk about 480 nanometer light, we're looking at blue light. Everyone tells you that blue light is bad. It's not. It really isn't bad because it's actually there and it actually is what drives your sleep wake cycle. And it is what produces that melanopsin so we are able to have our sleep wake cycles. However, that suprachiasmatic nucleus also drives a lot of other things. It drives our light and physiology cycles. It works with metabolism. So we're able to digest our food and not only digest our food, but utilize that food properly in our bodies for growth and development. Our heart rate is driven by the light in our bodies or that comes to our bodies. And it is driven because of cortisol that's produced by the adrenal glands, which also drives blood pressure. It drives our fluid intake. It drives our appetite. It drives our body temperature. All of these things are actually driven by light coming into our eye and going to that suprachiasmatic nucleus, which is our internal clock. Now, one of the biggest problems that we've seen, and in fact, the National Activity Pattern Survey was truly conducted in 1992, starting in September, until September of 1994. It was a long time ago. What is happening is the fact, and what they found then already in 92 through 94, was that 90% of humans' lives are spent indoors. We don't go outside anymore because we have that wonderful light bulb. We the amount of time that we spend outdoors is insignificant. It's so small that it barely shows up in the total. So when we live our lives 90% indoors, what's that do to our bodies? Well, it's extremely bad what happens. Physiologically, the changes due to sunlight or lack of sunlight, 50 to 70 million people in the world have disruption in their sleep-wake cycle. 970 million people have mood disorders because of this. 7 million have immunity dysfunction. 2.9 billion have digestive system dysfunctions due to lack of sunlight. 523 million have circulatory problems. 300 million have endocrine function problems, particularly in the pineal gland, which is sleep-wake cycles, the pituitary gland, which is the master gland of your body, which actually drives almost every metabolic function of your body, adrenal glands, which produces cortisol, which drives your heart and your blood pressure and many other things, but those two specifically, and reproductive tissues. 300 million people. And globally, 50% of our population has a vitamin D deficiency. And that all stems from lack of sunlight and too much artificial light. Now, when we talk about visible light, that from about 450 nanometers to about 760 nanometers, and it varies on who you talk to, that visible light is what actually allows you to see, because that is our daylight. However, those things that produce vitamin D, the beta endorphins, the serotonin that helps us to prevent brain cell death, to prevent melanomas, actually, that's in the UVB range. That's over here at about the 280 to 320 nanometers. And then you have infrared, which is over here, which is actually what gives you blood pressure regulation as well. It improves depressive disorders. It gives us energy from the sunlight. It stimulates heat receptors in our skin and penetrates deep into our body, and it's perceived as warmth. So as we look at this, a lot of what we utilize in our bodies isn't given to us in a light bulb, because what a light bulb gives us is this 450 to 760 nanometers visible light. We're lacking in all the rest of it. Blue light, which of course, they said for many years that if you are under blue light, because it is where melanopsin is actually produced in the intrinsically photosensitive retinal ganglion cells. It disturbs your sleep-wake cycles. Well, it also disturbs serotonin production, and so therefore you can get depressed. It disturbs beta endorphins, which helps us with pain management. And without blue light, it disturbs our systolic blood pressure because cortisol is produced because of blue light, not UV actually. And blue light has an antibacterial effect. Scientists and doctors have been telling us in the last, I would say 2 to 3 years in the journal articles, in medical journals and science journals that I've been reading, and I read a lot of them. There's times when I wonder if I'm going blind because of all the journal articles that I read. But basically, what they're saying, it's not necessarily the blue light, it's the stimulus that we receive from reading things and looking at websites and reading on our tablets or watching television and being stimulated by all of that. It's not necessarily the blue light that is causing the issue, it's more the stimulation that's causing the sleep issues. So as we look at this and we look at skin penetration and we talk about cancer, because of course cancer is that age old, if you get out in the sun too much, you'll get skin cancer. Well, but UV light and purple um, doesn't hardly even touch the epidermis. It it's barely beneath the skin level that that UV light penetrates. The penetrating light is the infrared. That goes down into our hypodermis and into muscle tissue. It's not the terrible rays that we see on the other end of the spectrum that can penetrate. They don't, but they're needed for that vitamin D production. There's over 1,000 different genes in your body that govern virtually every tissue in your body, and they're thought to be regulated by vitamin D. Now remember, 50% of our population globally has a vitamin D deficiency. It weakens bones because we don't have enough calcium absorption. It impairs immune function. Autoimmune diseases have a massive overload because of lack of vitamin D. Multiple sclerosis, rheumatoid arthritis, type 1 diabetes, all are on the uptick and have been for thousands of years, actually, because we're not seeing as much vitamin D production because people were moving northward. Remember, it isn't just the fact of artificial light, it's the fact that they moved away from the equator and went to those northern climates and they're not receiving as much UV light. Therefore, they're not producing as much vitamin D. So type 1 diabetes, multiple sclerosis, rheumatoid arthritis, we see more of in the northern climates than we do in the southern areas. And of course, then we see also that high risk of chronic diseases, cardiovascular disease. Some cancers are because you have a lack of vitamin D. Now, vitamin D production, like I said before, occurs in those keratinocytes. Their exposure to sunlight, specifically between 10 a.m. and 4 p.m., 10 to 30 minutes several times a week is all you need. It's all your clients need. If you will convince people to go outside more, they can actually be healthier because they're getting away from that artificial light and exposing their bodies to UVB light, which is necessary. You don't have to be out there forever. You don't have to be out there all the time. You just have to be out there long enough to make vitamin D. To look at some of these problems, of course, multiple sclerosis, I said, is due to a reduction of vitamin D. Interestingly enough, that autoimmune disease has become more prevalent in even countries that are closer to the equator. Since the Islamic traditions have increased again, particularly in Iran, that the women had to cover their bodies completely if they were out in public, those women, we are now seeing more cases of autoimmune diseases like multiple sclerosis because they're not getting the vitamin D that they need because of lack of sunlight. With diabetes, again, type 1 diabetes, we see a high incidence in the northern climates because of that reduced vitamin D in their bodies. And there was a study in Denmark about 5 years ago that they were looking at women who were pregnant and those women who were out in the sun more and those women who were not out in the sun. And they found that there was a 40% reduction of type 1 diabetes in the babies from the women who were outside more than those women who were inside in artificial light. So their children did not have type 1 juvenile diabetes because their mothers were in the sunlight more often during their pregnancies. Now, this study was not just in Denmark, it was in 51 different regions worldwide. So, again, more sunlight means less type 1 diabetes. Well, what about type 2 diabetes, which is that we have occur later in life? It's kind of the same story because the UVB light goes into our eye, goes to the suprachiasmatic nucleus, but then from the suprachiasmatic nucleus, it transmits information to this arcuate nucleus, which is down here. Now, obviously, sunlight's not going to get there any other way, but that stimulus from the suprachiasmatic nucleus sends information to that arcuate nucleus, which is the center for homeostasis of nutrition and metabolism because of UVB light stimulating that suprachiasmatic nucleus, which means lower insulin resistance. It means lower triglycerides. You have better insulin production because of stimulus from that arcuate nucleus, and you increase vitamin D, which reduces the risk of developing type 2 diabetes. Obesity epidemic can be gone because of UVB light helping all of those individuals with their insulin resistance and lower triglycerides. Now, Australia is where a lot of testing has been done, a lot of information, because in January of 1788, 236 years ago, there was an influx of people moving from England to Australia. And in fact, 50% of Australians today are of Anglo-Celtic descent. They came from a very temperate climate. They have very light skin. Overall, Australia has the highest rate of skin cancer in the world because you have all of these fair-haired, fair-skinned individuals living very near the equator. And they also have an unusually high rate of eye cancer. The evolutionary process hasn't been effective yet. They haven't been able to darken their skin yet. They haven't been able to darken their eye color. It's kind of a reverse of what our nomadic ancestors moving northward, these people move southward, and they haven't been able to adjust to that yet. And physiologically, and they will not be able to adjust for a few thousand years. But in the 1980s, what happened, Australia had started this, what they called the Slip, Slop, Slap initiative, which was kind of an interesting initiative. They convinced people that they should slip on a shirt, should slap on sunscreen, and they should slap on a hat. And that way it would help them from getting skin cancer. Now, does that mean that skin cancer is always caused by UVB light? Well, those people with less melanin in their skin, yes. But those people with more melanin in their skin, yes, it can be. But what the University of New Mexico found was that people with early stage melanoma, if they were out in the sunlight, those melanomas were often would go away, because melanoma is the type of skin cancer that's actually occurring more so on less sun exposed areas of the body. And in fact, what they have found is that if you have reduced UVB light on your body, not necessarily because of your skin, but just reduced UVB light, you have an increased risk of dying from Hodgkin's lymphoma, breast cancer, ovarian cancer, colon cancer, pancreatic cancer, prostate cancer. It makes no difference. You have a higher risk of having cancer because you're not getting the UVB and the infrared light that you need because you're living indoors. 90% of your life is indoors. Now, there was a clinical nutritionist put an article in the American Journal of Clinical Nutrition, and she was a researcher at Creighton University. Her name was Joan Lappy, and she's right here in Omaha, Nebraska, where I'm coming from. Joan has now retired, but her research showed us that 2 to 4 times daily reference and dietary reference intake of vitamin D3 resulted in a 50 to 77% reduction in the incidence of cancer, of all kinds of cancer, over a 4-year period. In other words, if you take in extra vitamin D, you will have a lower incidence or a lower possibility of getting cancer. Now, we say, well, there's LED light bulbs out there that actually promote production of vitamin D3. And yeah, there are. Their peak wavelength is around 290 to 320 nanometers. And it is effective in stimulating the production of vitamin D3. However, it's not very widespread. In fact, we see very little of this. We see more lizard lights than we do this. And you go, well, what's a lizard light? Well, a lizard light, people who have pet lizards have to keep them under a UV light that produces about 290 to 320 nanometers of ultraviolet light, because if they don't get that light, their muscles will not function. They literally become paralyzed. Now, if we can make lizard lights for lizards, why can't we make UV lights for humans? And you say, well, but people use those lights to get rid of their mood swings. Yeah, you're right, they do. But those are not that effective for other things. And you have to sit in front of those every day. You have to be very, very diligent on that. So why don't we just get it into our houses, get it into our schools, so people are actually able to? Another thing that actually the lighting people have talked about was the effect of artificial light at night, ALAN. Artificial light at night, they said, disrupted the pineal system, it disrupted the adrenal system, therefore cortisol levels and blood pressure. And I will say that if your blood pressure doesn't reduce during the nighttime hours, if you have light on during the night and you sleep in the light, even though you're not awake, your body is receiving light. You're getting light even through your eyelids. It can actually keep your cortisol levels up. And when you get that burst of cortisol in the morning, when you get up into the sunlight, you will actually see more people have heart attacks in the early morning hours than you will other times of the day, basically because their cortisol levels are too high overnight. The other thing we've seen is lower pregnancy rates. We know that people who work night shifts actually have a lower pregnancy level. They have higher rates of miscarriage. They have lower birth rates. And we also see sperm motility and testosterone levels in men being lower. All of that has occurred since 1888. That light bulb, artificial light, has actually caused reduction in our birth rates. They have looked at this in various ways. And interestingly enough, I show you this slide because it talks about a 12% increase in breast cancer because of outdoor light at night, suggested association between indoor light at night and increase of breast cancer. But if you read this article that came out in December of 2024, you find out that these are only based on a couple of studies. And the only one that really has any merit is the one that states that night shift workers have lower pregnancy level rates and higher miscarriage levels. The rest of it tends to not be as significant. Let's take a couple minutes to talk about infrared and near infrared. That's the 630 to 850 nanometers. That's the other end of the spectrum from ultraviolet. It increases blood flow when you get into infrared light. It increases the nitric oxide levels in our blood, which actually reduces diabetic neuropathy. It also reduces infection in those people who have diabetes. They'll get infection in their feet very often, and it reduces that problem. It also reduces the possibility of amputation because it increases blood flow. And all of that is due to that increase in nitric oxide level because of infrared lighting. Interestingly enough, it also increases collagen production. Now, those people who have concern about crepey skin, and you hear about it on TV all the time, and you see women slathering on all these different things on their bodies to make sure that their skin doesn't get that crepey look. Well, crepey skin is not going to be helped by all those wonderful solutions and things that you put on your body. However, what will decrease crepey skin is collagen production. Collagen production is increased because of infrared light. So getting out in the sunlight, or if you must, sit under an infrared light, it will help reduce the dryness, the cracking, the peeling, the crepey skin that you get because infrared light increases collagen production. So artificial light and human physiology, our light is not optimized right now for human health and well-being. It's not optimized. You talk to your customers, system integrators talk to their customers about human-centric lighting and circadian lighting and making sure that your lights are the right color tone, that right Kelvin temperature in the morning and at noon and at night, and getting the right temperature of light. That doesn't happen, people. I'm sorry. The light bulbs that we have today do not produce the right light that we need. Our clients look to us as the professionals. They look to us as those people who have the knowledge to tell them what is best for them, especially in their lighting. That What helps their health and wellness? We can make their house look great because of lighting. You get the right color of light, and the colors look beautiful in the right color of light. And you can change the color throughout the day, and their houses will look gorgeous. And you can tell them that that human-centric lighting will make them feel better. And psychologically, yes, it does. Psychologically, they will feel better because of that human-centric lighting, because of that circadian lighting. But physiologically, they're not feeling better. In fact, they're feeling worse. They don't feel well because that circadian lighting, that human-centric lighting doesn't work. It's all psychological. So when you're working with your clients, you can be the snake oil salesman. I'm sorry. But that artificial light, until they get it perfected to the point where you can have human-centric lighting that brings up the UV and the ultraviolet light at times during the day and brings it back down. We can't have it all the time, but we can bring it up and bring it down to what people need. And that is what's going to help us. I can tell you, companies are working on it as we speak. I've talked to people in foreign countries. They're not doing it in the United States. The most of the research has been being done in Germany right now on the lighting and getting those light bulbs perfected, and they're getting close. So hopefully one day we'll be able to say that our lighting is truly healthy for us and that we don't have to worry about it anymore. I want to thank you for being with me today. I want to thank you for coming to hear about this lighting we talk about and how we can actually have light that is necessary for our bodies. We offer classes like this all the time because of Construction Education Consortium, and we are here to help you to learn more about this and many other things in the industry.
Amazing. Thank you so much, LaDonna, for that presentation. So much great information that I feel was new to me and a lot of our attendees. We do have a lot of questions, so we can go ahead and dive right in.
Okay?
Um, so obviously a lot of our attendees are designers, so we have some questions regarding how they can take this information and apply it into their design for their clients. Someone asked, for clients who live in colder climates where they're stuck indoors more often during the year, can you get the same benefit of natural light through clear windows?
No. Almost, that's a short answer, isn't it? Um, Unfortunately, almost all of our windows today are low E, and low E windows stop the penetration of ultraviolet light into our homes. Ultraviolet and infrared, actually, because ultraviolet light fades our fabrics, fades our flooring, our carpeting, and as designers, we don't like it. And as people who own homes, we don't like it. And so we want those low E windows. So no matter how many windows you put in your home, it's not going to let the light in that you need.
That's good to know, absolutely. Similarly, someone asked, are there supplemental light therapies which are effective that can be utilized, especially for those unable to access outdoor spaces due to disabilities?
That's a big problem. It really is. There are a few, those little lights that people use because they have seasonal affective disorder. They do help. They won't be the best, but they do help people a little bit. Um, it's the industry. I mean, the lighting industry has to make that change. We shook things up at CEDIA last September when we presented this the first time. And believe me, we shook up the lighting world. Um, shook up the whole presentation, shook up the whole uh, CEDIA conference, because people just didn't know this. They don't read the journals.
Yeah,
Hopefully,
absolutely.
hopefully those people can actually, you know, if if their caretakers can get them outside for 30 minutes a week, that will help. Just take them out on a walk if they can.
Kind of to that vein, someone asked about a study in nursing homes where they use circadian lighting to help reduce resident falls. What are your thoughts on that type of technology? Is that a real benefit, or is that something that's more psychological than physiological?
Andy Bull got very upset about that. He was on our panel that presented this the first time. And Andy does a lot of nursing homes and lighting in nursing homes. And he said, now I have to tell all these people that I was doing everything wrong. Well, circadian lighting, what it does, it increases the daylight, it reduces the amount of um, shadowing, and it does help to increase the Kelvin temperature of light throughout the day and in nursing homes. And yes, if you have better lighting, people can see better and therefore they don't trip, they don't fall, that type of thing. Yes, it is important, and it does help. However, it's not going to help them physiologically, but it will help them see better and they won't fall as often.
Perfect. We do have a few questions just about innovation. People asking about, you mentioned Germany, they're developing this lighting. What companies specifically do, if you know any that are working on it? And some people asked, what do we do in the meantime if we're 5 years out? What are some solutions as we're waiting for this technology to come to fruition?
Unfortunately, the information that I have on these German companies is kind of insider information. I can't tell you who. Um, and it's it's exciting because it may not be 5 years out. We may see this sooner than later. I can only tell you that. So the
Okay.
innovation is there. They've been working on it.
And then what are we doing in the meantime while we're waiting? I know we have some questions about LEDs. Are they the best alternative right now to
No,
direct sunlight?
no,
No?
LEDs are not the answer at all. Actually, the old incandescent bulb gave you better light, um, and gave you warmer light than the LEDs do. Um, we really don't have anything out there right now. Go outside. That's my best answer to that question. Get outside more. Take a walk. Walk your dog. Um, be outside for 15 to 30 minutes 3 times a week. That's what you need to do. And that's what you need to tell your customers. The other lighting is just for effect. It's just for psychological effect.
Amazing.
Oh, and I
Um,
see a statement right now, and yes, I want to address that. LED lights have flicker. In fact, it's nasty. It can be up to 90% flicker rate, and flicker is very, very bad for health and wellness. You don't realize you see it, but you see that constant flashing of light, and your brain detects it. It can actually cause um, epileptic seizures. It can cause other types of seizures because of this flicker rate. And LED lights are worse than any other light with flicker. You have to make sure you buy them that don't have the flicker rate. That's what that's
I'd like
called.
to I'd like to end today with Jamie's comment in the chat, just talking about our best wellness design advice is designing outdoor spaces. Do you see the future being a push towards outdoor? Should designers be pushing their clients to incorporating outdoor spaces more? Whether that's maybe larger doors opening to outdoor spaces, indoor, outdoor dining, anything like that. Any insight that you can give us, I think would be helpful.
It's great in southern climates and in northern climates for 3 months out of the year. Yes, outdoor spaces, if you can get your people to go outdoors more, yes, that is an answer to many of the problems that we have in our world, is that if people would go outdoors more. And so, yes, we should be designing more outside. We should be getting people to design more of the doors that open and you're able to have all of that natural light come in instead of coming in through glass. Anything we can do to bring in that natural light and to bring people outside more would be very important. Unfortunately, there's those of us who live in those northern climates and 9 months out of the year can't get outside. Um, but you can still go for a walk in the snow.
Get some fresh, chilly air.
Fresh,
Well,
chilly air.
thank you so much for sharing your insight with us, LaDonna. And thank you again to Hardware Resources for generously sponsoring this month's Design and Business webinar series. Until next time, I hope everyone has a wonderful day. Thank you.
Have a great day.